The rain came down in a cold, relentless drizzle, coating the rooftops in a thin sheen that turned every surface slick and treacherous. On the edge of a crumbling building, the sniper known only as Shadowhorse lay prone, his body pressed tight to the stone, his breath a steady rhythm despite the tension running like electric current through his limbs. Through the scope of his rifle, the world became narrowed, honed to a single line of sight, and beyond it, just beyond, moved the creatures they had feared for months. The alien mercenaries, brutal and efficient, stalked the ruined city like wolves on the hunt. They were armored in black plates that glistened wetly under the pale city lights, their weapons humming low with an unnatural frequency. Shadowhorse had counted 14 in this unit, though the numbers shifted with each patrol sweep. He marked their leader by the way it moved, confident, cruel, unhurried, as though the city were already theirs. Below, in the hollowed-out remains of a market square, survivors huddled in makeshift shelters. Families with wide, terrified eyes, fighters reloading weapons with trembling fingers, medics tending to the wounded with ragged scraps of cloth. Shadowhorse's finger hovered near the trigger. His orders were clear. Hold the line until the green light came. The comm in his ear crackled, and Rena's voice whispered through the static. Talk to me, Shadow. What do you see? He adjusted the scope slightly. They're mocking us, playing games, laughing like this is sport. His voice was low, tight with a quiet fury. On the ground, Rena paced between barricades, her dark hair plastered to her face by the rain, her eyes sharp despite the exhaustion carved into her features. She was the leader they hadn't expected, but the one they'd needed, smart, unyielding, and fiercely protective of the ragtag group that now clung to life under her command. We can't afford a mistake, she murmured. Not with civilians so close. Shadowhorse exhaled, adjusting his grip. I won't miss. Across the street, behind a broken window frame, a young boy no older than 10 watched with wide eyes. His name was Milo, though few used it anymore. To most, he was just the runner, a quick-footed messenger darting through enemy lines, delivering supplies, warnings, or the occasional stolen laugh. Shadowhorse caught his gaze briefly, offering the faintest nod. Milo ducked away, slipping into the shadows like smoke. The aliens fanned out, boots splashing in shallow puddles, voices sharp and guttural. One of them kicked over a barricade, sending crates crashing to the ground. Another lifted a weapon, aiming it at the makeshift camp below, finger twitching toward the trigger. Shadowhorse felt his heartbeat slow. The world contracted, sound draining away until all that remained was the delicate balance of crosshairs against target. His finger curled, breath caught, and then he stopped. The green light hadn't come. Not yet. He pulled back, muttering a curse under his breath. His orders were clear, but his gut twisted painfully. At his side, tucked in a waterproof pouch, was a photograph. He kept it close, a relic of before. The face of his wife, her smile faintly blurred, and his daughter, caught mid-laugh, arms flung wide to the sky. He hadn't seen them in 2 years, hadn't heard their voices since the sky split open and the ships came, raining fire on every city that dared resist. Rena's voice returned, more urgent this time. We've got movement on the east flank. Civilians relocating to Sector 3. Can you cover them? On it, he murmured, adjusting his position, shifting the scope eastward. In the dim glow of broken streetlights, he saw them, a line of huddled shapes moving through the rubble, guided by armed escorts. The aliens hadn't spotted them yet, but it was only a matter of time. Shadowhorse's pulse quickened, but his hand stayed steady. He tracked the nearest mercenary, watched it pivot toward the evacuees, and waited for the unmistakable flicker of green light in his comm. It came, finally, mercifully, as a single sharp tone. The first shot was clean. The alien's head snapped back, its body crumpling to the ground without a sound. Panic rippled through the mercenaries, their mocking jeers turning to sharp, clipped orders. Shadowhorse moved with deadly precision, each shot finding its mark. The rifle's recoil a familiar jolt against his shoulder. Below, the evacuees surged forward, urged on by their escorts. Rena's voice called orders, calm despite the chaos unraveling around her. Milo darted between cover points, shouting warnings, dragging smaller children toward safety. But the aliens adapted quickly. They fanned out, searching for the sniper who dared disrupt their game. Shadowhorse felt the shift, the sudden tightening of the net. He ducked lower, breathing through the tremor of adrenaline, and recalibrated. He knew they would come for him next. The first explosion tore through the eastern wall, sending bricks and smoke into the night. Fighters on the ground scrambled to meet the new threat, but Shadowhorse stayed focused. One more shot, then another, each one thinning the enemy ranks by fractions. But even fractions mattered when you were outnumbered and outgunned. A shadow loomed in the corner of his vision. Instinct jolted him sideways as a beam of searing energy scorched the stone where his head had been. He rolled, slammed his back against the wall, and chambered another round. His ears rang, and his breath came hard, but he rose into a crouch, scanning for the source. Rena's voice was sharp in his ear. "They're onto you. Fall back." "Not yet," he gritted. Another blast tore through the rooftop edge. Debris rained down, and the rifle skidded across the wet surface. Shadowhorse lunged, fingers closing around the stock just as a massive figure vaulted over the ledge. The alien landed heavily, armored boots cracking the stone. Its eyes glowed faintly in the gloom, its weapon raised, mouth curled in a sneer. Shadowhorse didn't think. He drove forward, slamming his shoulder into the mercenary's chest. They crashed to the ground, struggling in the narrow space. Hands scrabbled at armor, feet slipped on slick stone, and somewhere in the chaos, Shadowhorse drove his blade up beneath the creature's jaw. The mercenary convulsed, twitched, then stilled. For a moment, there was only the sound of his own ragged breathing. Then the comm crackled again. "Shadowhorse, report." He pressed a shaky finger to the comm, one down. "Still here." The rooftop was littered with bodies now, alien and human, the rain washing red and black into small, churning rivers. He forced himself upright, clutching his side where a sharp pain blossomed with every breath. His rifle was damaged, the scope cracked, but he slung it over his shoulder and limped to the edge, scanning the street below. The last of the evacuees were disappearing into the tunnels. Rena caught his eye, lifting a hand in silent acknowledgement. Milo flashed past, waving with a grin too large for the moment, and vanished into the dark. Shadowhorse exhaled, a jagged sound torn from deep in his chest. For now, they were safe. For now, they had won this small, brutal piece of ground. But even as the adrenaline ebbed, as his knees buckled and the weight of exhaustion crashed down, he knew it wasn't over. The mercenaries would return, angrier and in greater numbers. The city was still bleeding, its people still hunted, and he, broken, battered, bone-tired, would rise again when they came. As he sank to one knee, letting the rain soak into his skin, his hand brushed the photograph in his pouch. He closed his eyes for a heartbeat. The image burned into his mind. Then he opened them, gaze hardening, and forced himself upright once more. The night was quiet now, but only for a moment. The war was waiting. The night stretched its long fingers across the ruined city, cloaking streets and alleyways in an uneasy darkness. Below the rooftop where Shadowhorse waited, the alien mercenaries moved with predatory grace, their armor catching brief flashes of flickering firelight. The streets pulsed with danger, and yet the sniper remained still, a statue carved from discipline and purpose. In his earpiece, The familiar voice of Captain Rena remained a thin lifeline, threading him to the world beyond his scope. Her words came measured, but the undercurrent of urgency hummed just beneath the surface. "Stay sharp, Shadowhorse. We've got evac confirmation. 40 minutes." He absorbed the information silently, eyes never leaving the leader below. 40 minutes. It could have been 40 years for all it mattered. Every second stretched thin, taut as a wire ready to snap. His trigger finger twitched instinctively, but he forced it still, the muscles in his jaw clenched tight. Across the street, movement stirred. A flicker of motion, too quick, too small. Shadowhorse shifted his scope, pulse tightening. A woman darted across the rubble-strewn avenue, her face a mask of desperation. Behind her, a child clung to her hand, stumbling to keep up. The sniper's breath hitched in his throat, his scope following them as they ducked into a collapsed storefront, vanishing from sight. He heard Rena's voice again, softened now, threaded with an ache she rarely let slip. "We can't save everyone." "I know," Shadowhorse whispered, though the words scraped his throat raw. He drew in a long, controlled breath, dragging his focus back to the mercenaries. The alien leader paced with a restlessness that betrayed its boredom, gesturing to its soldiers in a language sharp as breaking glass. Two mercenaries peeled off, moving toward the building where the woman and child had vanished. Shadowhorse's fingers tightened on the rifle, heart hammering against his ribs. His orders were clear: do not engage until the signal. But the weight of inaction bore down on him like a crushing hand. His scope lingered on the aliens as they approached the hiding civilians, his finger brushing the trigger, so lightly it was almost a caress. "Shadowhorse, report," came Rena's voice, steady but edged with tension. "Two moving toward civilians. West sector. I could take the shot." A beat of silence. Then, negative. Maintain position. His throat worked around a bitter swallow. Every instinct screamed at him to act, to stop what was about to unfold, but he swallowed it down, shoving it deep into the part of himself he kept locked away. Through his scope, the woman emerged from the shadows, arms raised in surrender, shielding the child behind her. The mercenaries loomed over them, weapons raised, their laughter a jagged, metallic sound. Shadowhorse closed his eyes for the briefest moment. He saw his daughter's face again, small, worried, brave. He saw his own trembling hands wrapped around hers. He saw promises he had made, whispered in the quiet dark of a safer world. When he opened his eyes, the sniper was back. Cold, focused, waiting. Minutes crawled by like wounded animals. The mercenaries toying with their prey, the civilians trembling in the dark, and Shadowhorse, watching it all, muscles coiled and aching. The city seemed to hold its breath. Then, without warning, the comms crackled with new energy. "Shadowhorse, we've got movement on the eastern ridge," Rena reported, urgency snapping her voice. "Reinforcements inbound. We need eyes." He shifted his scope, dragging his vision eastward. Shadows rippled across the broken skyline. More alien figures, heavily armed, weaving through the ruins with grim purpose. His stomach twisted. Whatever window they had was narrowing. "Estimate 20, maybe 25, he murmured into the comm. "Heavy armor. ETA 15 minutes. Rena's reply came fast. "Copy that. Keep eyes on them. We're accelerating the timeline." His chest tightened, adrenaline licking through his veins. His mind flicked through the terrain, calculating. 25 was no small number, and the resistance fighters scattered through the city were ill-prepared for a full frontal assault. His role had just doubled in weight. As the eastern force closed in, the mercenaries on the street below dragged the woman and child from the storefront, shoving them into the center of the road. Shadowhorse's scope snapped back to them, his heart climbing into his throat. "They're making an example," he muttered, half to himself. "Stay sharp, Shadowhorse, Rena warned. We're almost there. The alien leader raised one clawed arm, signaling to its soldiers. Their weapons lifted in unison, a grotesque choreography of violence. Shadowhorse's muscles tensed. His fingers sank against the trigger, barely restrained. Then it came, so sudden it felt like a slap. The green pulse across his calm, the long-awaited word. Green light. Rena's voice broke through, fierce and unwavering. Your go. The world snapped into razor-sharp focus. Without hesitation, Shadowhorse exhaled, long and steady, centering his sights on the alien leader. The moment stretched thin, all noise falling away. Then his fingers squeezed, a whisper of motion, and the rifle cracked like thunder. The leader's head snapped back, black ichor spraying from the ruined helmet as it crumpled to the ground. For a beat, silence reigned. Then chaos erupted. The mercenaries spun in panic, their jeering laughter replaced by the sharp barks of alarm. The civilians bolted, disappearing into the maze of rubble as Shadowhorse chambered the next round with fluid precision. Another shot rang out, a second alien down, a third, a fourth. His rifle sang a brutal rhythm, every shot a promise kept, every fallen enemy a blow struck for the broken city around him. In the comms, Rena's voice was electric. Beautiful work, Shadowhorse. Keep thinning them out. Reinforcements will intercept the eastern flank. Shadowhorse world narrowed to the rhythm of breath, aim, fire, reload. He moved with an efficiency born of hard experience, his mind a steel trap snapping shut on each target. Below, the tide turned. Resistance fighters surged from hiding, emboldened by the sniper's opening salvo. Makeshift barricades sprang up, civilians pulled to safety, and the mercenaries faltered under the combined assault. Shadowhorse watched it all through his scope, a grim satisfaction threading through his exhaustion. But even as victory teased the edges of his vision, his gaze slid eastward. The reinforcements were nearly upon them, their armored forms gleaming in the moonlight. He swung his scope, heart pounding, and fired again. 1, 2, 3, chipping away at the advancing line. It was not enough. Captain, he breathed. We need more time. Rena's voice crackled through, fierce and resolute. You've got it, soldier. Hold that line. The eastern mercenaries stormed forward, undeterred by their fallen. Shadowhorse world became a maelstrom of motion and fire, his arms aching, his throat dry, his focus unyielding. Yet even as exhaustion clawed at him, he saw something, movement in the rubble, small and fast. The child. The boy darted through the chaos, searching wildly, terror etched into every movement. Shadowhorse blood ran cold. His scope tracked the boy as a towering alien closed in, its weapon raised, its maw split in a savage grin. Time slowed, breath hitched. Without thinking, Shadowhorse adjusted his aim, ignoring the larger threat barreling toward the city's heart. His fingers squeezed. The alien's head snapped back, body crumpling to the ground mere feet from the child. The boy froze, eyes wide, then stumbled backward into the arms of a waiting fighter, who swept him up and sprinted for cover. A ragged breath tore from Shadowhorse's chest. Captain, he rasped, the kid's safe. Rena's voice came back, softer this time, threaded with a quiet awe. Good work, soldier. But there was no time to linger in the small victory. The eastern force surged, and Shadowhorse shifted back, chambering his last magazine. The night stretched out before him, violent and unrelenting. But beneath the weight of exhaustion, something glimmered, a flicker of resolve, a whisper of hope. He straightened, shoulders squaring as he settled into position once more. The city still burned, the enemy still advanced, but the rooftop sniper remained, waiting, watching, ready. The night's cold wind tore across the rooftop, whipping at Shadowhorse cloak as he steadied his rifle once again. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the ache of endless focus, the burn of muscles stretched past their limit. The taste of metal lingered on his tongue, the scent of scorched earth and ion fire filling the air like a bitter perfume. He pulled in a breath, feeling the vibration of the city's heartbeat under his boots, and narrowed his eye to the scope. Below, chaos rolled like a living tide. The eastern flank had breached the outer defenses, the alien mercenaries pressing forward with brutal efficiency. Resistance fighters scrambled to hold the line, their shouts fractured by bursts of gunfire and the hiss of plasma. The earlier surge of hope now frayed at the edges as the sheer weight of enemy numbers pushed closer. Shadowhorse tracked the advancing wave, counting, measuring, waiting. Through the comms, Rena's voice came low and firm, holding back the edge of desperation. Shadowhorse, report. How bad is it? Worse than bad, he muttered, adjusting the sight as 3 armored mercs closed on the barricade. We're running out of ground to give. We got backup inbound. 10 minutes. 10 minutes felt like a lifetime. 10 minutes was a battlefield of broken promises. Shadowhorse grit his teeth. Understood. His scope landed on a tall, heavily armored figure, barking orders and swinging its weapon toward the defenders. Without hesitation, he exhaled and squeezed. The shot cracked, the round tearing through the alien's throat. One down. His fingers worked automatically, chambering another round, tracking the next target. Below, he saw her, the woman from before, the one who had shielded her child. Now she moved with quiet ferocity, pulling wounded fighters to cover, pressing a rifle into the hands of anyone still standing. Her face was streaked with soot, eyes burning with a wild determination. Shadowhorse felt something shift inside him, a flicker of respect that deepened into something sharper. He scanned farther, catching sight of a young fighter crouched at the barricade's edge, rifle trembling in uncertain hands. The boy's jaw was set, but fear carved deep lines into his face. Shadowhorse exhaled, whispering words the boy would never hear. Steady, kid. A sudden burst of light pulled his eye back to the main street. An enemy transport tore through the wreckage, plowing toward the last line of defense. Mounted guns lit up the darkness, cutting swaths through debris and bodies alike. Panic rippled through the defenders as the machine bore down on them, a mechanical monster hungry for blood. Shadowhorse felt the pull of decision: shoot the driver, disable the gun, or buy the defender's time by thinning out the ground troops. His fingers hovered, tension crackling through every nerve. Rena's voice sliced through the haze. We need that transport stop now. His choice sharpened to a point. Shadowhorse shifted his aim, heart hammering. The scope aligned with the pilot's head. Breath held. Finger pressed. The round split the night, and the transport veered, screaming metal against metal as it careened into a collapsed building. For a heartbeat, silence. Then the explosion ripped through the street, fireball blooming skyward, shaking the rooftop beneath his feet. Cheers burst over the comms. A thin, ragged cheer but alive. Shadowhorse allowed himself the ghost of a smile before turning his focus back to the battlefield. But the reprieve was short-lived. Movement flickered at the periphery of his scope, dark shapes scaling a nearby rooftop, circling toward his position. His breath stilled, fingers tightening around the rifle. They had finally noticed the hand tipping the scales. "Captain," he murmured, quiet urgency threading his voice. "I've got company." Rena's reply came quick, sharp. "Fall back if you can. We need you alive." He snorted softly. "Not much of a runner, ma'am." The first alien vaulted onto the rooftop, its blade gleaming under the shattered moonlight. Shadowhorse spun, rifle cracking out a desperate shot that sent the creature tumbling back. But more followed. Lean figures armored in black, their movements swift and sure. He ducked behind a ventilation unit, switching to his sidearm with grim precision. The first attacker lunged, blade slicing air where his throat had been a heartbeat before. Shadowhorse slammed the pistol's muzzle into the alien's chest and fired point-blank, wrenching himself free as the body collapsed. They came in waves, and he danced the brutal rhythm of survival. Dodge, shoot, strike, fall back. The rooftop became a killing ground, the hiss of plasma mixing with the sharp bark of gunfire. Shadowhorse's breath grew ragged, arms burning, vision narrowed to the flicker of movement and the flash of steel. For a moment, the battle blurred. His body moved on instinct, 1,000 drills and hard-learned lessons stitched into muscle and bone. He fought for every inch, for every heartbeat of time bought for the defenders below. Then, as suddenly as it began, the assault faltered. The last attacker fell with a choked snarl, armor hissing as it met the rooftop. Shadowhorse staggered back, chest heaving, the acrid taste of smoke thick on his tongue. His comm crackled. "Shadowhorse, status?" Rena's voice was tight, threaded with worry. He coughed, half laughing, half choking. "Still breathing, ma'am." "Good. Backup just crossed the southern ridge. We've got them flanked." Relief warred with exhaustion as Shadowhorse slid back to his rifle, collapsing into position. Below, the battle had shifted. Resistance fighters surged with renewed strength, pushing hard against the eastern force. The air was thick with the roar of gunfire and the defiant cries of a people who refused to break. Shadowhorse watched the woman again, the one with the child. She fought alongside the others now, no longer just a mother, but a warrior carved by fire. And the boy, he had found his place at the barricade, a borrowed rifle clenched in shaking hands, his face set in a mask of resolve that was too old for his years. The sniper's heart twisted. This was why he stayed on the rooftop, why he endured the weight of every shot, every moment of waiting. It was never just about the orders or the mission. It was about them, the people who refused to kneel, who rose again and again, even when the world tried to crush them. Another burst of static snapped him back. "Shadowhorse," Rena's voice rang out, fierce and commanding. "Final push. We need you." He answered with a quiet, steadying breath, settling into his scope one last time. The eastern mercenaries were faltering, their lines buckling under the combined assault. And yet, in the heart of their formation, a new figure emerged, a commander draped in dark armor, towering and brutal, cutting a path toward the defenders. Shadowhorse's mouth went dry. This was the linchpin, the fulcrum on which the battle turned. His finger hovered over the trigger, heart thundering. The alien commander raised its weapon, sweeping aside fighters as if they were nothing. "Shadowhorse," I traced the path, measuring wind, distance, and chance. He exhaled, slowing time to a single heartbeat. The shot cracked, echoing like a bell across the city. The commander staggered, clawed hand rising to its throat as dark blood spilled over gleaming armor. A moment of stillness rippled through the battlefield. Then, like a dam breaking, the mercenary line collapsed. Fighters surged forward, sweeping the enemy aside in a tide of defiance and fury. Shadowhorse sagged against the rooftop, a ragged laugh shaking his shoulders. For the first time in hours, his fingers loosened on the rifle, his body registering the weight of every bruise and cut. "Shadowhorse." Rena's voice broke through, soft with something like wonder. "You did it." His gaze drifted to the horizon, where the first pale streaks of dawn stretched across the sky. Below, the city stirred with battered triumph, survivors gathering, voices lifted in exhausted joy. And in that quiet moment, Shadowhorse felt something ease inside him. Not victory, not peace, but the fragile, flickering promise of it. He closed his eyes for a breath, drawing in the cool air, and when he opened them again, the world was still broken, still waiting, but it was also alive. The first rays of dawn stretched across the war-torn city like tentative fingers, casting soft gold on crumbled stone and scorched earth. Smoke curled upward in lazy spirals, the stench of ozone and ash clinging to the air. From the rooftop, Shadowhorse watched as survivors emerged from the wreckage, moving with the dazed, uncertain steps of those who had lived through the unimaginable. He could barely feel his legs, could hardly lift his arms, but his eyes remained sharp. The rifle lay beside him now, its barrel still warm, the metal marked with the sweat and blood of the long night. Below, the battered defenders were regrouping. Fighters embraced amid tears and laughter. Makeshift medics darted from body to body, and the sounds of weeping and cheering mingled in strange harmony. Shadowhorse drew in a shallow breath, his ribs protesting. He was no stranger to aftermaths, no stranger to the quiet that followed chaos. Yet something about this one settled into his bones in a way he hadn't expected. It was more than survival. It was reclamation. The comm in his ear crackled to life. Shadowhorse status. He pressed the button on his lapel with a slow, deliberate motion. Alive, Captain. Mostly. Rena's laughter came through, tired and bright. Good. Stay put. We're coming up. He let his head tilt back, eyes slipping shut for a moment. Every inch of him ached, but the ache was threaded with something sharp and clean, relief. Still, as the minutes stretched, his mind wandered, tracing the faces he had seen through his scope. The woman with the child. The boy at the barricade. Fighters young and old, weathered and raw, thrown together by desperation and bound by courage. The sound of boots on the rooftop snapped his eyes open. Rena appeared, her figure silhouetted against the lightening sky, her uniform marked with grime and sweat. She strode toward him, a grin tugging at the corners of her mouth. Hell of a night, she said, crouching beside him. Hell of a shot, he returned, voice roughened by exhaustion. Her eyes softened as she reached out, resting a hand briefly on his shoulder. You bought us a city, Shadowhorse. You bought them time. He didn't know what to say to that, so he simply nodded, gaze drifting back to the street below. Rena followed his line of sight. They're alive because of you. Not just me, he murmured. Never just me. They sat in companionable silence as the first rays of sunlight kissed the ruined city. Slowly, the rooftop filled with others, fighters making their way up to pay respect, to check on the sniper who had stood between them and annihilation. The boy from the barricade came last, his steps hesitant, eyes wide. Shadowhorse pushed himself upright with a wince, offering a small, weary smile. You held your ground, kid. The boy's mouth worked soundlessly before he managed. Because you were up here. Shadowhorse reached out, ruffling the boy's hair with a clumsy gentleness. You've got your own kind of courage. The boy ducked his head, a flush creeping over his cheeks, and when he looked up again, his eyes were brighter, steadier. Shadowhorse watched him go, something easing in his chest that had been locked tight for longer than he could remember. But peace was a fleeting thing. Rena's radio flared to life, a voice sharp with urgency. Captain, you need to hear this. Her face tightened. Go ahead. Survivors from the outer districts just arrived. They say this was just a forward unit. The main force is en route. Hours out, maybe less. The words fell like stones into the hush that had settled over the rooftop. Rena exhaled slowly, her jaw tightening. Copy that. Begin evac protocols. Get civilians out. Fighters regroup and resupply. She turned to Shadowhorse, her eyes shadowed. We're not done. He gave a soft, almost bitter laugh. We're never done. Even as the adrenaline stirred, even as the familiar mantle of duty settled over him, Shadowhorse felt the weight of something different pressing against his ribs. He'd seen these people rise once, seen them claw a fragile victory from the jaws of destruction. He knew they could do it again, but it would cost them. It would cost all of them. The rooftop became a flurry of motion as runners delivered orders. Medics triaged the wounded, and engineers rigged last-ditch defenses. Shadowhorse forced his body to move, to fall into the rhythms of preparation, but his mind roamed elsewhere. He thought of the woman with the child, the fierce determination etched into every line of her face. He thought of the boy at the barricade, the way his hands had steadied, the glint of something unbreakable blooming in his gaze. He thought of the fighters whose names he didn't know, whose lives he'd held in the crook of his finger as he'd lined up each shot. And as the sun crept higher, casting long shadows over the battered city, he felt the flicker of a thought take shape. Something wild, something dangerous. They could win. Not survive, not hold out, not endure. Win. The idea took root, wrapping around his exhaustion, coiling through his doubt. And when Rena returned to his side, her expression grim, her shoulders squared under the weight of command, he met her gaze without flinching. "What's the plan?" he asked. She smiled, tired and fierce. "We make them regret ever landing on this planet." He nodded, feeling the steel slide back into his spine. "Good plan." Together, they moved through the city, weaving among the fighters and civilians, rallying hope from the wreckage. Shadowhorse checked his rifle, fingers running over the familiar marks, the grooves worn by countless battles. The boy fell in a step beside him, carrying his own weapon now, not with fear, but with purpose. The woman joined them, a rifle slung over her shoulder, eyes hard and bright. Around them, others gathered, faces marked by smoke and sweat, by loss and defiance. As the hours slipped away, the city transformed. Barricades rose from rubble, traps were laid in narrow streets, and every hand found a task. Shadowhorse watched it unfold, feeling the pulse of something bigger than strategy or survival. This was resolve. This was the unyielding will of those who had tasted freedom and refused to give it up. And when the first rumble of engines trembled through the ground, when the horizon darkened with the approach of the true enemy force, Shadowhorse stood at the barricade, the boy at his side, the woman a few steps away, and Rena at the front, her voice carrying over the crowd. "They think we're broken," she called out, the words slicing through the hush like a blade. "They think they can crush us. But we are still here, and we are not done." A roar rose from the defenders, ragged and fierce. Shadowhorse lifted his rifle, sighted down the scope. His breath steadied, his heart slowed, his mind sharpened to a single, burning point. This was not the end. This was the beginning of something new.